A lot of my formative years were spent inside of arcades, playing video games almost constantly. This was the first of them. Shinobi wasn't in an actual arcade, but it was in an old video rental shop at the end of the street. We never actually rented anything from there that I can remember. I just dragged my dad down there to play this game virtually every night, usually with the hope that this time I'd beat Mandara, which I almost never did. We only had a Specky at home at the time though, so you can imagine just how exciting and addicting this was. 1992 was the best time, when foolishly my mum and dad decided to take me to Southend Seafront, a golden mile filled with a ridiculous amount of arcades, machines both legendary and obscure. And that was it. Every Friday night was sorted. Drag my parents down to the arcades, play one machine in every single one of them, then get a McDonald's on the way home, like a pub crawl only for children. It was brilliant. Sure, Peter Pan's was the other side of the road, and that was pretty cool too, but not as cool as the arcades. I forced my parents down there so often that later in the year, they told me that actually all the arcades were closed now for the winter. This worked for about a month or so, at least until my dad accidentally drove me down the seafront one day, and I noticed the arcades actually weren't closed at all. This was truly a glorious time to be in the arcades. So many of the machines are etched onto my heart. There was the fighting games, of course. Street Fighter 2 was everywhere. Mortal Kombat was soon to come. Sometimes, being a kid, I'd happily go up to two older people on a machine demanding a challenge, only to be told in no uncertain terms to piss off. There was WWF WrestleFest, absolute manna from heaven for a wrestling fan, and still my all-time favourite arcade machine. And of course, there were all the beat-em-ups. The Simpsons, another thing I dearly loved as a kid, Knights of the Round, Final Fight, and Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, which is actually thanks to jumping on a game halfway in that a player had left, the first game that I ever actually completed. There are many awesome memories from that time. You never quite forget the first time that you jump into an afterburner cabinet, for example. Sure, it's so intense that you normally don't stay in there for long, but it sticks with you. There's ridiculously obscure ones. A Crystal Maze trackball game at the bowling alley on the pier, which I absolutely loved, more so than the bowling even. Sadly, another fire on Southend Pier in 1995 claimed the game. Oh, and the bowling alley too. Pier fires are kind of a fact of life down here. Capcom's Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. I quickly became obsessed with this game in particular, to the point where myself and a childhood friend would come to the seafront to play only this game, until we actually beat it, which we finally did after like a tenner's worth of 20p's. Namco's Aquajet may not look like much now, but at the time, with the jet ski and all, it made you feel like you were actually in Baywatch and not some spotty little snot on the verge of secondary school. I have many great arcade memories, and whenever we went somewhere else and I happened to see an arcade, well, I'd obviously want to stop. I could be quite persuasive about it, or whiny if you prefer. There was Dragon Ninja in Clacton, Mad Dog McCree in Skegness, Captain Commando at the Carnival, an entire holiday in Calpe spent playing House of the Dead 2. Still, Southend was always the home of the arcades for me. After all, at one point or another, Southend had all these machines and then some. But gradually, things changed. Less of the games that I used to love, more fruit machines and the like which I had no interest in. More penny falls and what have you. Pinball went out in favour of yet another crane game, or just plain areas where young folk weren't allowed in, budget cheap as casinos. It seemed as though the arcades just fell into disrepair. Some of them don't even exist anymore. Other features just disappeared. I imagine that the basement of both Mr. B's and Sunspot is still made up of the eerie corridors and alien surroundings that used to make up Quasar Laser Tag. Perhaps a bunch of the games are still down there too, just rotting away. And well, things haven't changed a lot since then. The arcades and amusements may still be there, but a lot of the games are modern and, frankly, not worth the time of day. Some of the machines kinda look a little worse for wear, and almost all the arcades feature the exact same things. It's like there isn't much point in going on an arcade crawl anymore, because one arcade features the same games as another. It's uniform. It's boring. It's absolutely nothing compared to what it was. Kinda like Southend as a whole. Once Southend was a beehive of activity. The seafront was always packed, there were events damn near every month, the high street was buzzing, it had all these little pockets of character, and now a lot of it's gone. And not just on the seafront. The high street? Good lord. Once you couldn't move for people, now you can't move for closed up shops. The slow death of physical retail has certainly had an impact here. Giant VHS stores shut for years, a revamped shopping centre that has forever been half empty, character-laden old cinemas torn down for flats that are sure to be built at some point. This right here. This is the Kersal Estate. It's at the back of what was and still is one of Southend's premier attractions, the Kersal Building. Back in the 1950s, this used to be a theme park. Now, this is one of the most deprived areas in the whole country, right down there with South Blackpool, Middlesbrough and East Jaywick. Funnily enough, they're all on or at least near the coast too. There's a fair few spaces like this in coastal areas. They feel eerie, on edge, filled with the twin graffiti and security camera memorials to those who've lost their lives here. Amazing to think just what this area once was, to be honest. This is of course one extreme example. What's largely prevalent is a slow degradation, as places which were once hotspots gradually fade away or disappear completely. Long-time Southenders remember the little things, like Lagrange's bench opposite W.H. Smith's, or the little shops in York Road Market, or even notable embarrassments like the Millennium Clock that stopped telling the time about 2 months into the year 2000. Some of these were good, others less so, but they all came together to make a weird and at least interesting hodgepodge. Better than seeing things closed down at any rate. Still, from my perspective, I can see the possibility of turning things around. Obviously, Southend will never become any sort of retail hotspot ever again, it's far too late for that. But even if shops will fade out, is there not a place for more entertainment? I mean, naturally we do have a ton of restaurants. Chances are pretty good that when a shop goes down, someone with a dream of opening a naval-themed Indonesian fusion joint will take its place, at least for a little while. But what about the arcades? There's a feeling in the air. Could arcades be making a comeback? When you go around the country, you see arcades not only surviving, but suddenly thriving in all sorts of forms. You can now find plenty of arcade-themed bars in most any major city. There's more and more expos where people come together to play arcade games old and new, big establishments like Berry's Arcade Club. More and more places like this are cropping up. A lot of them have something for everyone. There's a place for the latest VR experiences, something a lot of people still can't really get at home, but are clearly a big hit in any venue. And of course, there's plenty of the old stuff, where either memories can be relived, or people can just come and enjoy the experience. There's food, drink, merriment, and people that actually give a shit. It does kind of seem that we're still waiting for such things to hit Southend though. Not that there aren't any. There's places and people, old and new, arcades and not arcades, who are trying to kickstart the heart of what was once one of the UK's premier entertainment destinations. And in other areas, there's plenty of people who want to maintain the character of this seaside town, which Morrissey once said that they forgot to close down, and it may be down, but it's not out. And over the course of this series, we're going to find them out. So get your ice creams, gather your sticks of rock while you may, because we're going to the seafront. Come join me. Thanks for watching this, the first episode of Disappearing Southend. A special thank you to all of my patrons who have made this series possible. If you like the video, then please do subscribe for plenty more stuff. I'd like to thank these patrons now. Adam Schaefer, Alex Stocco, Alexander Giseri, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Daniel Briggs, Daniel David Taylor, David Rose, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Grafham Blackpool, Ian Roberts, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Durso, Jason Goy, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Josh Jensen, Lee Norris, Mark Greaves, Martin Pataki, Mike's Games Room, Morton Scarnin, Nanette McCrone, Nicholas Tristan, Olaf Albeen, Peter Jack, Peter Sidorn, Phil Taprog, Potter Margell, Pocky Southmaid, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Ryan Burford, Sammy Lee, Samuel Victor, Scott Coulter, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stephen Warner, Yerka Operator, and Zach Roach. Thank you all so much.